Hi, I'm Hildur Guðnadóttir, and today I am reflecting on my work as a film composer. Well, it was so beautiful to see this come together because when I started working on Joker, I got the script and I wrote a lot of music just based on my feelings of the script and the tonality and the sense of musicality that I was feeling internally. Interestingly, when I was writing this music, I had this sense of movement, obviously, I was, the cello was my instrument, so there's a lot of like hand gestures that I was in. There was a lot of this kind of upper body uh, sensations that I was feeling in the music, but I had never said anything about that to Todd, and there was nothing in the script that indicated any sort of dancing or any sort of movement, and in this scene in particular, it was really just like not much was happening in the script in the scene. It's kind of, he runs into this bathroom and throws away his gun and looks in the mirror and says, "Oh," or something like this. That was the scope of the scene in the script. Like it was really not a big plot point or a big moment. And somehow, as they were starting to shoot the scene, and Joaquin somehow wasn't he just wasn't really feeling it or something. He was having a bit of a hard time just getting into it, and they had already been, listening to this music that I composed for the film on set, and Todd puts on this track, and he says, well, maybe you just listen to the music and see how it inspires you. And then the scene just appears, in connection to the music, and he starts this dance and these movements, which were so similar to what I was experiencing when I was recording the music. So and it was just so beautiful to see how it all unfolded, and it kind of just like is this impromptu situation, and then the cinematographer, starts following the movements, and it becomes this kind of like beautiful fluid scene. And then when Todd sent it over to me, I just couldn't believe that this was was what I was seeing, because it was so similar to what I had kind of experienced myself. So I feel like it was just such a beautiful moment of all the elements of filmmaking coming together. The director, he just was so open to us bringing what we had to the table, and he was so willing to let us kind of do our thing, and then he just like lets this unfold, and it's I think it's a really it was a beautiful moment, I think. When working on Chernobyl, because it's a real story based on real events that so many people that are still alive experienced, and for me that was a very different process than working on a fictional story where anything goes really, and I think there's a level of respect that you have to have for the story and the survivors, and people that were affected and people that lost their lives, and so on. So I really wanted to be as true as I could to the story itself. Like I really didn't want to sensationalize anything. Like I didn't want to storm in there with big drums and a string orchestra, and kind of over dramatize these events, because they're horrific, enough as they are. So I went to this power plant in Lithuania, which is the sister power plant to Chernobyl. So it's exactly the same as Chernobyl was, and recorded a lot of sounds that turned out to be the main source of the score, basically. So there's no instruments in the score. All the sounds in the score come from this power plant, with the exception of my voice, which was like the human element, because I really, and it was a lot of hassle to work in this way, and it took a really long time to be able to work with these sounds in this way that worked musically. But I thought it was just so important to try to understand and to try to capture what radioactivity sounds like, because that was, I think, the main character in the series that we couldn't see with our eyes. You can't film radioactivity, and you can't explain it really with words. So I wanted to create a sense of feeling the radioactivity through the music, and in order to do that, I felt like I had to have actual radioactive sounds, so to say. And the Bridge of Death in particular, it's just such an heartbreaking scene. You have all these people on this bridge, and they're so in awe of what they're seeing, and for them, they're seeing this incredibly beautiful situation unfold before their eyes. But we know that it's going to be the death of all of them to stand on this bridge, and that most all of them will die or get very ill as a consequence. So it was just trying to find the balance between being allowing the emotionality to be there, but still keeping a sense of horror, about what actually will happen. That was that was kind of what I was trying to achieve, to be emotional but not too prescriptive.
How's the writing going?
Not so well. I keep hearing something.
Schopenhauer measured a man's intelligence against his sensitivity to noise.
Do you ever find yourself overwhelmed by emotion?
Yes. Yes, that does happen.
Well, Tar was so interesting on so many levels. I think Tar just is like layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of things that you can dive into. But I think for me personally, I was writing music as a person in a film who is posing as another person. But trying to write as herself, through her music. So it was so many layers of emotional complexity, because also, we in this film we have a character who has created this completely made up person who's Lady Atar, and who's like, the master of the podium, when she is conducting these big orchestras, but somehow that's also just all a lie, and she, in her heart of hearts, wants to be writing music that's much more experimental and fragile in its nature, and much more seeking. So she has these insecurities about herself that comes through in the music that she's writing, that's completely disconnected to her podium person. So it was so interesting, to write through and with and into all of these layers. It was really, really wonderful, and also really exciting to see, to feel the actual real life response to the film, because it really, for better or for worse, however you want to look at it, really shook the world, with its take on how we are allowed to write stories about women or represent women as what is the spectrum of how we can talk about women's characters and their actions and their positions of power or not or non-power, you know, and of course, first and foremost, the position of female conductors. You know, I read so many articles about female conductors, you know, in the real world after this film came out. That was such a joy for me to you know, whether or not you agree with the approach that we decided to take for the film, you know, because obviously a lot of people were not in agreement, and which I completely respect and understand, of course. But I think the real victory in whichever camp that you end up in is that female conductors got a lot of space in you know, the mainstream media, and I think that was just fantastic. You know, I think it really put a lot of focus into the women, because we have so many brilliant women conductors, and I worked with a few of them who are just so unbelievably brilliant at their job, and so such amazing musicians, you know. And it was so fantastic to see just like the focus finally going towards them.
I've seen a million of these so-called psychics, each one a fake.
I do not believe in psychics.
Come with me to a seance. Spot the con I can't.
Detective, you are here to discredit me, but I can talk to the dead.
I'd give all I have to hear my daughter's voice.
If someone wants to be heard, we are here. Listening.
A Haunting in Venice is probably the most classical score that I've done to date, and in my work I will often be exploring, you know, built-in instruments or found sounds, or implementing, you know, these kind of experimentation into the music. But in this score, I was really excited to just focus purely on the music and focus purely on the instruments. And I think that was also largely because I was so interested in the music history of this period. And I think it's such an interesting time in music history, where composers and the world at large, really, you know, that they've seen their world completely, you know, been bombed apart in during the Second World War, and they start asking all of these questions, like, you know, why are we doing this? What is music? What is sound? What is all these preconceived ideas about the world and about the music that I've had, and who am I, and, you know, where am I going towards? Like, how am I going to rebuild my world? And I think composers, especially the kind of forward-thinking, you know, experimental classical composers, if you will, were really abandoning melody and abandoning these old musical structures. Like the sonata form is completely thrown out the window, and all these old structures, and you know, they're seeking to rebuild themselves and reinvent themselves by exploring, you know, extended techniques of playing and different forms of musicality. Like, you know, we have the atonal, very mathematical sense of everything is very structured, and you know, where do emotions fit within that, you know, either that very mathematical approach, or chance compositions become a thing, and all these different ways of expressions that the composers are looking towards. And we're in the film, we're really seeing exactly those transitions as well. Like we're seeing Poirot essentially asking the same questions, you know, so we're much closer to him and his emotional journey than we are in a lot of the other films. You know, we get to go deeper into his emotional depth. So he's exploring, you know, who he was before the war, what happened to him during the war, and who he will be, how he will reinvent himself, and he retires, and he's trying to you know, just focus on gardening and you know, start a completely different career. So, and I thought that there were just so many parallels between seeing in music history and what we're seeing him go through. So basically how I approached it was to kind of superimpose the use of melody into these moments of time that we see in the film, you know. So we have in the beginning, you know, he wakes up from this dream state, and as a lot of times in the film, we're unaware of, you know, whether this is real or it's not real, if it's a dream, if it's a ghost, like where we're sitting. So the way that the melody is working in those very first moments is almost like in this bardo state between non-melody and melody, between not going somewhere and going somewhere, and between the waking and the sleeping, between the natural and the supernatural. So that's almost like this in-between state, and then we have the moments where we're looking at the past, for example, in connection to the girl who's one of the first victims. You know, we're looking at her in the past, and then we're approached with this you know, these romantic, you know, more romantic melodies, and we're taken on a more melancholic, backwards looking outlook, and then, for example, towards when the world starts breaking apart, we have much more like atonal music and structural music and everything in unison and working very fracturally as things start to crumble, and then in the end where we have the big reveal and the whodunit, and the world kind of restructures itself to move forward, then we're leaning towards the more atonal tonality that these composers are moving towards, moving forward, you know. So there's this big connection between the history of the music of this time and the story in my mind.